Hello guys, thank you for joining me today. In today's lesson, I'm going to show you guys how to create a corset bodice. You can put this into a dress, you can wear it by itself. I'm just going to be doing this tutorial sort of in reverse to show you guys how I created this gorgeous bodice that I put into one of my recent designs. So I've created a pattern just specifically for this dress, and you're going to be able to find that in my Etsy shop. I'm going to link the pattern in the description, and in addition to this video, you're going to get an actual visual tutorial with written instructions so that you can really have the best advantage at putting this particular pattern together. So I am going to link that in the description, and that pattern goes from size 0 to size 20. If you need a size larger than a size 20, there's also a Simplicity who creates the pattern that's very similar to this pattern, and that would be the Simplicity 1183, and I will also link that in the description as well. But again, you can find this pattern that I'm using in my Etsy shop. I will link that in the description, and it will give you a full visual tutorial along with written steps that's really going to make this a lot easier, and you're going to be able to follow along with this video and that tutorial so that you can get the best possible outcome. Here you're going to see all the pieces cut out, and then you'll be able to follow along and create this pattern. Okay, again, that link is in the description, and it's going to be my corset tutorial. In addition to the pattern, you're also going to need this foam bra sheet. I use these for a lot of my cup projects, and it's just a thin piece of foam that I use to create any kind of cups, whether it's my push-up cups or just my normal cups that I add into some of my dresses. I got this from a shop on Etsy, and I'm going to link that in the description as well. You're also going to need boning. You can use this plastic whale boning that you can get pretty much in any store, even in your local sewing shop like Joann's or any of those other stores. I use this for most of my projects. If you are going to go up a size or you want a lot of support, there are other boning options. You've got whale boning and you've got steel boning, but I use this boning basically for most of my projects, and I'm going to use it in this one as well. Okay, I'm also going to give you guys an idea of some of the fabrics that I'm going to be using in this corset top. I'm going to be using several types of fabric. For the base of this corset, and you're going to see it's pretty much this part right here, which is going to be more closely to her skin. I wanted something soft and also something stretchy. So I use this 4-way stretch mesh for the base of it, and it's kind of sheer, but it also gives a lot of good stretch, and it's nice and comfortable when you lay it against the skin versus just straight up tulle, which can be a little itchy and irritates the skin. So it's just basically a 4-way stretch mesh that I use for the base layer of the corset to go right there, as you can see. The second layer of the corset bodice is this organza. And this is just standard organza, and I use this to create this sheen that you see. So you see there's sort of this glossy sheen that the corset bodice has, and it's basically achieved with using a organza in light color. So you can decide this for your corset, or you can decide that you're going to forego this look. But if this is the look that you want, this sort of glossy sheen, you achieve it by using the organza. The next layer that I'm using is this lace that I found. It was a 3D lace, but what I did was I just cut off the 3D petals just to get a flat look. I like the dimensions and the symmetry of this particular lace, so this is what I use for the base, and I cut it all as one piece, as you'll see soon. So sometimes with this lace, you lay the entire thing on top of the bodice after. That's one technique. I chose to cut it for each panel of my corset. And again, this is just so you can add some dimension. It doesn't necessarily have to match exactly. It actually looks pretty cool when it doesn't match exactly. Now we're going to go over how I got this gorgeous channeling and this piping look that I have to my designs and what fabric I use to create that. So I use this very soft silky charmeuse fabric in the lavender. It's stretchy, it has a good stretch, and I just like the silkiness of it. The only downside I would say to when I was doing my channeling was it was a little flimsy. As I realized when I was sewing it, it was pretty flimsy, so I had to back it with interfacing first and then place it on the bodice, because prior to that it just looked kind of wobbly and it wasn't very attractive. So if you're going to use this as opposed to just a more stiffer satin, I just want you to know you're probably going to have to interface this to get it nice and stiff. Otherwise it's pretty flimsy, but I did enjoy the shine on this. Now I want to show you guys some of the other lace fabrics that I use to achieve the different sort of dimensions and colors. I use this one. It has tiny speckles of sequin on it and it's a little bit darker, and I use that, as you can see, for those parts of the corset where it's just a tiny bit darker, and it does give a little bit of sparkle when it hits the light. I also use this lavender type fabric. It's a little bit off, but it does again offer a little bit of dimension, and I use that for the petals on my dress, just so that it just wasn't all just one solid color, and that it made it a little bit more interesting when you put it together, that it has sort of different aspects of this sort of purple lavender color. So now we go on to this sort of channeling that we use for our bra area, and I got this on Etsy, and I'm going to link that in the description as well. And what I use it is for the underwire part. This is what I'm going to be connecting to the cups in order to pass that underwire through it. This comes in different colors, but I just used the nude because I had the nude cups and I just wanted everything to sort of match. So this is what you're going to use in order to get the underwire into your cups. So now we're going to our lace up area, and for this I used Organza, but you're also going to need to make sure you have eyelids for your project. You can use any type of eyelid color. They have all kinds of colors if you go shop around. I just use silver for my project, but there's a variety of colors available. Lastly, what you're going to need is lacing for your corset top. You can either make your own lacing from discarded fabric from your project, or you can purchase lacing. I chose to purchase lacing because I found ones that come with these helpful little tags, and it makes it a lot easier in order for you to lace up your corset without having to squeeze the fabric through. So I'm going to link this artist in the description, but again, I decided to use a store-bought lace up because it had these taps on them, and just be sure you get in the proper size, because unfortunately I didn't, and I had to cut and connect, which, you know, just doesn't look as nice as if they were all connected. So again, I'm gonna add that artist link in description, and again, I like it because they come with the taps themselves. So that's pretty much what you need to create this bodice corset. We've seen these everywhere. They're very popular right now. So if it's a project that you're interested in doing, let's go on to the next step so I can show you guys how to put this together. In order to make sure that your corset fits accurately, you want to make sure you have the following measurements, whether you're doing this corset for yourself or you're creating it for someone else. There are 3 measurements you want to make sure you have. You want to make sure you have a full bust, under bust, and waist. Those are the key measurements you need in order to know what size to cut. So first you're going to take the measuring tape and go right around the bust, making sure you're at the point. Then you're going to get those numbers. Then you're going to go right under the bust. Get those measurements. Drop that a little right on the waist. Get those measurements. Those are going to be the 3 measurements you're going to use in order to know exactly what pattern to cut for your corset. This is a visual of the layout of the fabric pieces as well as the paper pattern pieces, and just showing you how they mirror each other. And I'm just basically laying everything out for you guys to see, as well as see how I took all my markings and just corresponded it to the fabric reference that I had from the paper pattern. Here's the full layout of the muslin mock-up. As you can see, I've labeled all my pieces. I make sure I put corresponding markings and reference points. That's going to be very helpful to me. Now I just want to focus for a few minutes on the cup portion of this garment. So here's the top cup and here's the bottom cup. So what I've done is highlighted these specifically to know the difference. So the blue is the bottom for the foam and the pink is the top for any fabric that you're going to use for that, whether it's satin or lace. When you're done, you're going to assemble this entire thing. I'm going to cut to a still of what it looked like when I assembled the entire thing on my dress form. I have a couple of clips of that, and you're going to make sure that you're paying attention to all the seam allowances and all the special markings. So here we have the muslin mock-up. This is the front view of it, and here is the back view of it. And this just lets us know, okay, this is how this is going to fit, and if there's any changes that we need to make at this point. Also, if you've been following me, you know that I created a custom bra inserts video. I'm not going to go over how to create the cups in this video because there is already a video uploaded on my channel of how to do so. Here I have laid out all 3 of my layers. And I've laid out my muslin pattern after I had drafted it, realized everything looked good to me, tried it on my client, everything seemed great. So now I'm on the phase where I'm taking my main fabric or the actual fabric that I'm going to use for my creation, and I'm just cutting out each piece. So for this demonstration, I basically cut out just, I would say, about half of the corset. So I did the center front and just the second panels from that point, just for you guys to get a better view of it. So I've cut out my pieces on my foam cups here, so you can see my foam pattern exclusively cut out. And I also have cut out just half of the bodice, so it's just easier to work within the frame of it. Obviously what you do to one side you do to the other. I've also cut out my cup area in the fabric portions as well, as you can see here. Some key things I wanted to just let you guys know. If you are working with 3 or more, 2 or more fabric layers together, I would say best practice is to sew them together. Why? Because a lot of times when you're working that through the sewing machine, the pieces can shift within themselves and it's going to look sloppy, and it's also going to affect the fit of the garment. So if you are working with a pattern, and this is for pretty much any project, I would say baste all the layers together, and I do have a video on what basting is, but I would say baste all the layers together so that way everything stays together, is nice and neat. Is it an extra step? Yes. Is it a little tedious? Yes, but that is sort of the mainstay with high quality garments. Is it takes a little bit longer. That's why these pieces are often more expensive, because they do take a little bit more work. Okay, now I'm at my machine and I'm using my right side of my fabric, pressing those seams together with the pins and sewing them with the right sides facing me, and so that those seams are nice and flat. Here we're pressing the seams nice and open and flat so that they're ready for us to move on to our next step. So now this is my seams all pressed together, pressed open. Now I'm just going to cut away the excess so that the seams are nice and narrow for me to add my channeling. Again, you want to make sure you refer to my custom cups video so you can get exact details on how to put these foam cups together, but this is just me letting you know that's the next step. After you're done sewing your cups together, you want to make sure you press them so that they're nice and round and they have a good shape. You're going to need to make your channeling for this project. What I've done is I've cut several of these strips. They're usually about 1.5 inches a piece. So I've cut several of these strips so I can do various channeling. Here I have laid out just a sample piece that I interface. So this is my charmeuse stretch. I'm going to fold it in half and pin each section down, and this just prevents it from slipping and sliding all over the place. When you're using these very soft fabric, they tend to slide all over the place, and you don't want to end up with an uneven strap because it doesn't do you any good. So this is just me pinning everything together. Once you're done pinning, I usually go and I press so that it's nice and flat. I can sometimes even baste it if I have enough time. If not, if I'm running behind, then I don't baste it, but I do go in and then I'm going to machine stitch this very closely on the edge. I would say about a 1/2 inch actually is where I'm going to stitch it. It's going to look a little bit like that once I've stitched and then trimmed. After I've done that, I'm going to turn it over and press it open, as you can see right there. So now you can see that I've created that sort of tunneling and the channeling, whatever word you like to use for that. I've created that by just simply stitching that across there, cutting off the excess, and when I was done cutting off the excess, I just pressed that seam open. I recommend sometimes actually pressing it open and then cutting off the excess, because it does get a little tricky when you do it in the reverse. But this is how you're going to create the channeling and the different kinds of strips that you need to go across the cups, as well as to apply your boning to. Now we want to make sure that our corset looks high-end and expertly made. For the inside of this corset cup, I'm going to actually add just a layer of organza across these seams. One part to just cover them up. Another part is it does create a very interesting high quality look instead of just leaving the bare zigzag stitch. You add this on top of it and it definitely gives it another dimension so that the corset looks beautiful both on the main and the right side, and it also looks great when you turn it over and look in the inside. And that's really a key quality to making really well-made pieces, is that they look good from all kinds of angles. So here you're going to see me use this binding tool. I do have videos on my channel on how to use this binding tool, but this is what I'm going to be using to create these panels here that I'm going to be attaching to my corset. So I'm going to be placing one right across here and then the other one across the bottom. So we have our completed cup, and now we want to add some decorative design to it to really make it stand out. So we're going to take our organza that we've pressed at the machine, and we're going to now add it to our cup. Make sure that you have this facing the inside of your cup, because it's going to be the inside detail. And what I do is I just go in and I pin it down, and just be careful with the pins because it is a little tougher to take the pins through this type of material. So I go in and I basically trim that there once I feel like I've got enough going. There's a variety of ways to stitch this. You can use a zigzag stitch, or you can just use a simple stitch where you're going to go along the edge of both the top and bottom of each of the sides. So it's totally up to you how you want your piece to look. Now I have my cup set out, and you can see here I have it marked with the back, front, and the top of the cup. So you want to make sure that you've done all your markings so that each piece is going to go exactly where it's supposed to go. Here you can see that when I fold them over each other, they fit nicely. I'm going to edge stitch that. So I'm going to take my pins first, and I'm going to edge stitch that just to ensure that when I'm putting these pieces together that they go accordingly. You want to take that binding after you're done edge stitching that, and you want to place it on top, because that's where that binding is going to go. So before you sew the top part of your cup, you're going to need to add that. So this is what it looks like when I've sewn my organza to the inside of my cup. As you can see, I decided to use the stitching on the edges versus the zigzag stitch. So it's totally up to you which design that you want to use for yours. And this is what it's going to look like when it's shown the inside of the cup. So this is the inside of the cup, what it's going to look like. And I'm just there testing it, letting you guys know exactly what it should look like. And that's what the inside of the cup should look like. Now the bottom part of your cup, this is what I came up with. You can see I have that seam going across the lower bust area, and I also decided to just edge stitch both of those things. You always want to test this out to make sure that it's even. One of the ways I test it is to make sure that when I put these together that they are matching. You don't want to wait until you sew the entire cup together and then realize like the placement is off, like the bigger area in the back is in the front area where the front is, because it gets very confusing, and any kind of confusion to a sewing project can immediately just make you want to give up. So we don't want to give up on this project. We want to see it through. So just make sure everything is matching as you go along. Now I'm going to show you guys how to add the lower part of the cup to the upper part of the cup. You want to make sure that that front part is smaller, as you can see, so that you know it goes to the front, and that the back part is larger so that you know it goes to the back. If you do any kind of special marking, that's also going to be helpful to you as well. Now I'm just going to pin these together as I do with any of my other projects. You just want to pin everything together. Anytime you're going around a curve, you're going to be required to do a bit of easing in. So if you see that once you've matched end to end and you're like, wait a minute, this is like spilling over the edge, it only means that you need to actually continue to manipulate the fabric to get a good ease in. It does fit, it does match, but it just requires a bit of manipulation, and that does, over time, you'll be more and more comfortable with it, knowing that you're not forcing the pattern into itself, but that you're just creating a bit of ease, especially when you are coming around a curve. So I'm just going to pin that together, and again, you want to make sure that you stitch 1/4 of an inch. This pattern, most of the stitching is 1/4 of an inch in, because the seams are very, very small, because we're going to be sewing over and on top of them continuously. So you don't want super bulky seams, and also you don't have to cut away too much, because that will affect the size of the pattern. So I've sewn that together, and now I'm going to add that channeling, tunneling, binding, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to be adding that across the top of the cup area to create that additional detailing. This is totally optional, but if you want the look that this corset is going to have, as far as this fine detailing with the binding going across, this is the only way to get it. So now you're going to do the same thing you did to the bottom part of the cup, you're going to do to the top part of the cup, and you're just going to take that binding and pin it along the edge. I would recommend, when you're coming around curves especially, to always baste before you go to the machine. For me, because of the grooves of the lace on this piece, I found it a little tricky that when I took it to the machine that it moved all over the place. So if you do choose to use a lace with this, I would recommend you going ahead and basting it down first before you take it to the machine. So now I have my pins in and I'm ready to go. So now we have the inside of our cup and the outside of our cup, and we know exactly what it takes now to get that gorgeous binded look on our cups. Next step is going to be now connecting the two pieces together. So what I do is, again, I want to make sure that everything is where it should be. So I like to sort of line them up together. So what I do is I try to make sure that everything matches up, so that when in fact I go inside to put everything together, everything is matching, and I'm not waiting until it's time for me to finish my garment. So I sneak in, I look there, I'm like, okay, the small side matches the small side, the larger side matches the larger side. So I'm confident that when I begin to sew this together, it matches. I'm also going to do a flip, because when I do that flip, it's going to let me know that once I begin to sew, I know that once I flip it over, after that permanent stitch, like it's going to look exactly the way I want it to look. Now I'm just going to go in for good measure and pin everything around nice and neatly, and that way everything will be in place. I'm going to choose to base it while just giving a little bit excess of fabric to the top to make sure there's not too much bulking. Instead of matching the seams up the way we normally do, we normally match up the ends, you may have to come up just a little bit in order to get those ends together, and then you're going to pin all around and then sew. So this is what it looks like with the finished cup. Now I'm just going to take my scissors and go along the top and cut off the excess. And that way we don't have a lot hanging down here, because that does make it tricky later on. Once I've done that, now it's time to fold that over. And that looks great. This is what we want. That finished cup. Well, almost finished. So that's what that looks like. You go to this side and the inside looks like that. We do some pressing to keep everything nice and flat. And we're going to work on closing this up so that we can begin to place it on the lower part of our corset. So now with pins, I'm going to pin down my corset cup. I'm going to gently tug on it so that without misshaping the cup, I'm able to get the fabric around it. So here is a close-up view of the pressed open seams so that we are ready and prepared to begin to add our tunneling to our corset. So this is just a close-up view. I've pressed my seams open, I've cut them down so they're nice and narrow so that there won't be any spillage when I'm adding my tunneling. So I take my piece and I lay it on top of the seam, as you can see here. And you want to lay it right on top of the seam and just begin to pin it. It's okay if there's like a little bit of excess at the bottom and the top of it. You want to be able to cut off, versus if you don't have enough, then that's going to be an issue. So it's better to have a little bit more hanging over than to have some of it missing. So now you're going to add your tunneling. So here what I'm going to do is just simply pin each piece of tunneling down. Once I've pinned each piece down, again, as I mentioned before, because of the roughness of the lace fabric, it shifted quite a bit in the machine, especially with the bulk of the seam facing this way. So I recommend basting it down, and you can do a basting stitch right down the middle, and that way your actual stitches won't interfere and it'll be nice and easy to remove that basting stitch. So again, I just go in and I simply pin the entirety of the channeling down and then run a quick basting stitch through it so that it's nice and easy for me to remove once I'm done. And you're going to repeat this for each and every one of your seams, with the exception of the center front for right now, because the center front we're going to do together because it requires just special marking. Over the last few years, I accumulated a lot of information from running this business from my home. And when I first started out, what I found to be the most difficult, specific information for how to run my business. There was tons of information about how to run a business or maybe how to run a fashion design business. But I didn't really have a lot of source material that I could run my dressmaking business and really figuring out how to scale that to be a consistent form of income. And I thought, you know what would be a great resource to my viewers and to anybody who is thinking or considering starting a business from their home? Is it possible? How do I do it? So Professional is a 62-page productivity and dressmaking business planner available for purchase in my Etsy shop. See link in the description. Use code SEWPRO for 20% off. So now that we've added the channeling to all of our other seams, as you can see here, now it's time to add that channeling to the center front of our corset. This does not have a seam per se, so you actually have to make a seam, so it's very important that you stick with the markings. I like to do trace seaming, and that way I can just sort of take a brighter thread and just trace over the seam that would have been there. I also use a water soluble marker just to make sure that those lines are accurate, and I just use a basting stitch to trace over that area so I know where I'm going to place my channeling. Then I just place my channeling right on top of that line, and then I'm going to pin everything in place. You can do a basting stitch right down the center of this, so that way when you are running it through the machine, the channeling does stay in place. So now we need to add those back panels for the eyelets that we need to put on our corset. And I have the pattern here that I've cut out. You want to make sure that the arrow is facing downward so you know what direction your fabric is going to have to go. So once that's removed, I make sure that I transfer that fold line over to my actual main fabric, and you're going to go in and interface it with a stiffer fabric. For my initial corset, I did use organza for this. I will have you just as a reminder or just something for you guys to know. If you do use a softer, finer fabric, it might look pretty, but it may not hold up to the eyelids, as I'm realizing I have to redo that panel for that specific reason. So that's just like a little extra note. So I'm gonna now exchange it in for this taffeta, which is a little more sturdier. So we're gonna interface this, press it, and then we're gonna fold it in half. Now I'm going to take the fastening compartment and attach it to my corset. You want to make sure that you have it folded and the folded side is facing towards the center front, which would be this part here. You're going to open that up and make sure that the edges line up, and then you're going to pin it open on just the one side. You want to go in about 1/4 inch and sew that compartment down. So I've sewn that piece down, and this is what it looks like on the wrong side. I've sewn that piece down, and we're going to open it up. And what I would do is press this part down, fold it over it like so, and then fold one more time so that we're covering that seam. I'm going to pin Once that's been pinned down, you want to sew an edge stitch right on top. Make sure it's nice and neat because it will show on the other side, or you can do a hand stitching. I would say a machine stitch is a lot more secure, especially when this is going to be pulled quite a bit when you apply your eyelids. We're going to take it back to the right side, and I'm going to measure with my ruler over the space that I'm going to use to create a channel for my boning. So I'm going to go in a little under 1/2 inch probably closer to 1/4, and I'm going to create a line. I always use disappearing chalk, especially when I'm working on main garments. You can use pen or pencils when you're working on draft garments, but when I'm working on main garments, I want to leave the least amount of marking. So I just take that and I mark straight up. Once that's done, I always want to pin everything in place or baste it, and I'm just going to stitch along the mark that I made. You want to have enough space so that you can apply your eyelets, as well as enough space that you can apply your boning. So again, whatever I'm doing to this side, I've just made this small sample section just for you guys to be able to see everything clearly without me having to constantly slide the garment back and forth. So this would be the center front. So essentially from this piece on, you're just mimicking the same steps that I did until you have the entirety of the corset. So I'm just doing the one side. Whatever you do to one side, you do to the other side. This is the center of the corset. So each of these other panels are just going to be repeated on the other side for your full corset. Okay, and this is going to be the center piece. So now we have our cup. I'm going to flip over my corset, wrong side, wrong side. And now I'm going to begin attaching my cup to my corset. You're going to make sure you keep in mind with the notches, because that's going to be really important to you when you are trying to put the corset cup to the actual corset. If you somehow forget, for this particular pattern, a rule of thumb would be this portion, this line here, should be in the middle of these two seams. So you don't want it exactly on this seam or on this seam, because it's not going to sit properly. So you at least want to have it like right in the center. You're going to take pins, and then you're going to pin this entire cup to the inside of the top of the corset. So this is what it looks like when you have the cup situated in the top of the corset. I'm just going to go in and hand stitch everything before I run it through my machine, and then I'm going to go 1/4 inch in and stitch as close to the edge as possible around this entirety. Also note that when you're pinning, if you have a little excess over here at the top of your corset, which is going to be the center, that's okay. You're going to have to fold that over towards the finishing stages of the corset, so don't freak out, but it is more important that this is more aligned, because you're going to add that binding here, so you want to make sure that's more even. But it's okay if you have a little bit of excess here after you've attached your cup. So this is what it looks like with everything sewn on. Our cup is nicely in place. And now we can move on to our next steps. Again, whatever you do to this side, you do to the other side, so you can have your complete corset. Now you're going to make sure that you have this channeling. I got mine from Bespoke on Etsy, or you can just go directly to their website. I'll have the link in the description, but they come in all kinds of colors. I usually get a variety of colors for different skin tones, but they also come in just like a rainbow of colors. So I'm going to use this nude just to match the nude of my cup, so it's nice and cohesive. What you want to do is you want to go in, and the way I do it is this seam right here, I attach it to the seam here, not the bottom part right now, just the top part. So the top I take and I pin to the top of where the cup is. You want to make sure you're not sewing and smashing anything while you're going, so you want to make sure it's kind of something like this, so that the raw edge here is still open when you're done sewing. So you're going to take your pin and pin that around and baste it if you need to, and then you're going to stitch. So as you can see here, I've sewn down the top portion of my tunneling. Now I'm going to go in and just clip away this excess fabric so that it lays nice and flat for me to do that second stitch. So you want to go in with your scissors and go right underneath and get as close to the edge as possible and start cutting away the excess fabric. And you do that throughout the bottom part here. Once you're done, you go in and you're going to fold that down. So you're going to fold down and pin. And you're going to work your way around until everything is folded down just like this. If you like, you can baste it so it lays nice and flat, and then you're going to edge stitch right around this area all the way to the top. Next, we're going to put the underwire in. So once we've gotten that sewn down, now it's time to add our underwire. Most underwire, you want to make sure you get the matching cup size with your underwire, otherwise you're going to have excess. Usually they come marked so you know which side goes to the front and which side goes to the back. With that being said, I take the side that goes to the back and I insert it to the top of my cup. And you pretty much just slide it in there nice and easy, and there you go, there's that shape. Instant shape it gives to the cup. And we are ready to move on to our next step. So we're going to move on to closing up this top portion of the corset. I'm going to use organza. You can use the satin similar to what is here. You can use the taffeta, you can use whatever one you want to use, but I would say try to keep it cohesive. Whatever you use for here, you're also going to use to finish off the lining for the top part of the, rather the binding for the top part. So for this example, I'm going to use this organza, and it's about an inch, inch and a half. You can see here, it's already pre-folded, and I'm going to take it right to the top here. And I'm just going to pin it to the top here on both sides. And that piece is going to go there. You want to take a nice edge stitch and stitch right along the top part. You may want to cut off some of this excess. You want to stitch there. Then we're going to flip that over. Again, there would obviously be a cup here on this side too, and you're going to flip that part over so we can finish off the top part of that. So we're finishing up this part. I did my machine stitch. Now I'm going to flip this over and flip it on the wrong side. I'm going to fold in these corners. On both sides. Once they're both folded in like that, we're going to go in and fold down. I want to make sure that everything is covered. It's nice and neat. And then you're going to hand stitch across. So I'm going to fix that there so it goes right under. And then I'm just going to take a gentle hand stitch and stitch across and make sure I don't catch anything on the other side so there isn't any obvious markings on the other side of my corset. And this is the finished result of the top part of the corset being laid down with that bit of organza. Next, we're going to move on to finishing the top part. Whatever you do to this top part, if you so choose, you can do to the bottom part as well. I'm just going to teach you the basic steps, only because I use this corset to go in a dress, and I didn't have to bind the end of the corset because I only used it to bind. But the same process that I'm going to show you up here is what you're going to use at the bottom part. Okay, so first we want to close up the top part because we're going to need to do that in order to add our boning. I have my organza here. This is what I'm going to be using to close it. It's some of the remnants from when I just made a batch of binding to add to different places. So I'm going to use it here. It's pre-folded. You can open yours up. You can have yours like this. I'm just going to have mine that's already cut in the shape. And again, it's 1.5 inches. I'm going to apply the top part here all the way over, leaving just a little excess because I'm going to need to use that. I'm going to take my pins and pin along the edge. Once I have that there, I'm just going to go in and stitch. Make sure again you have just a little bit excess hanging over because you're going to need to fold that. So you're going to edge stitch that on your machine. You're going to cut off any excess. I would say leave about 1/2 inch to 1 inch of seam allowance so you can also fold that over. And whatever you do to one side, you do to the other. I've gone to the machine and I've sewn this down. So now I'm going to go ahead and flip this over. But first I'm going to tuck in some of that excess and then fold over. Pin down, do the same for here. The same is going to be said for here. I'm going to tuck that over and do some fabric manipulation to make sure everything is nice and even. Now you can machine sew this, but I do recommend a hand sew so that you can be sure that none of the stitches will be seen on this side of your corset. So you can just gently do a blind stitch. I do have a video on how you can do that, and you can go in and you're just going to sew that down. You might want to even make this a little tighter. Mine's is a bit wide, so I'll go in and make that more thinner so that it matched up with the front here. If you so choose to wear this as a normal corset, after you add the boning, you're going to do the same thing to the bottom. But for the sake of this, I use mine to put inside of a dress, so I only need it to bind the top part of this. So you're going to go in and either hand stitch or machine stitch once you can ensure that the stitches are not going to be seen on this side of your corset. Next step is to add the boning. Okay, end result of applying that binding to the top. And now let's move on to adding the boning. We're going to use, again, this plastic boning for this particular corset. I would advise, I do have this pattern in sizes 0 to 20. The larger sizes, if you want the support, you're probably not going to get it in this plastic boning, especially because there's just not enough channels. You would need more channels. So you have two options. You can actually add channels on yourself, so you can go in and just apply more channels. What does that mean? So you're just going to go in and put more channels inside of your corset. You want to space them out evenly, and you can just add more channels, especially since these are top channels. and then use the plastic boning. If you don't want to add more channels, if you want this look here, then I would say you're going to have to use metal boning. And metal boning looks something like this, because the ends are already secured off by itself versus the plastic boning where the ends you can just easily cut. The difference is you're going to have to be accurate in your measurements when you are purchasing this. So you're probably going to have to purchase different sizes and different lengths, and make sure that you're accurate in the widths. But if you are in the larger sizes of this pattern, then this would be way more helpful and much more supportive than just this. So those are your two options. Add more channels so you can get that full support, or you can change out your boning. So you have this option available, and you also have the spiral metal. I don't have an example of that with me, but you can look that up. It's just the spiral metal boning, and those are perfect for a larger bust, so that you can have much better support versus the plastic, which you would just have to add more channels in order to get that same support. So for the sake of this, I'm just going to use the standard plastic boning. I like it as well because you can also cut, like if you realize you don't have the right width, I can just go in and cut. So how do I apply this? I go in and I just simply measure the distance. And then you want to make sure you don't end at the very end, because you're going to need some form of another to sew into this. Either you're going to add binding to the top, or you're going to need to add a skirt or whatever you choose to do to the bottom like this. So I always go full way up, and then I measure just about a ½ an inch up from the end of it. So there's always going to be this space so that I can sew across without any issues. Once you've done that for each of these, it's a simple step into inserting each piece into your garment. We are entering the home stretch, finishing up our corset. Now we need to go back and add in our eyelets. Grid rulers are great for this because it allows you to see what you're doing as you're working. So what I normally do is I go down about a ½ inch, and I take my water soluble marker and I try to make sure I'm right in the middle, and I make that point, and then I square it with that point and go down about an inch, and I continue to do that to ensure that each point is centered and evenly spaced. So that's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 6 eyelet spaces for this. The next thing would be to use these pliers I got again from Bespoke. You can get them from anywhere. You just want to make sure that the grommets that you're using, and these are grommets, I'm just going to use pink for the sake of this tutorial, but you would probably want to do something that complements the corset. They even have these in many different colors, but you just want to make sure they match. So I'm going to use this. I'm going to use the full part of this initially to create holes. Once that's done, I'm going to use my awl to get nice and deep inside of there to create big holes. Now we're going to repeat this throughout the entirety. I have my hole here. We're going to repeat this throughout the entirety of the corset. Next, we're going to take our eyelet, place it in with the eyelid part facing this way, our fastener this way. Using our tool, I usually go in with the pointy part up. You can open that up. Oh, it's not open. open that up, and we're going to apply some pressure, and there you go. You're going to do that several more times until it's at the entirety of this. You're also going to do the same thing to the other side. Now I'm going to show you another way to add your eyelet to your finished corset. So you've seen that I've added these here. I've shown you that you can use this tool here, but some of you may be fairly new to this and you don't have access to that tool, or you don't feel comfortable using it. Most of the time when you go to the store and you buy, like Joann's or something, and you buy the kit, it does come with the pieces already there. So you have your 3 attachments and you have the tool that you need. So you're going to make sure you have a hammer, and you're also going to get these tools right here. And this is just an easier, more efficient way to get it done. That way you don't have to look for these additional pieces. There is a couple of tips and tricks to use this, and I'm going to show you. So my particular kit comes with the top part, this top part here. We've got this plastic piece that we're going to put in the middle for reinforcement, and then the end piece. I prefer this kit because it just makes me feel like it's a little bit more secure than just the 2 metal pieces. I don't know if the fabrics are going to rub between each other and create sort of like a cutting mark there. So I like to have that plastic buffer in between. So you have your 3 pieces. I place my eyelet into this piece. And you want to make sure it gets in there snugly. You don't want any sort of out fabric coming from the outside. So if it's not snug the way it is in here, what's going to happen is over time, as you're pulling on it through wears, you're going to notice that it's going to start pulling away, especially when you have a fine fabric. As you can see, I had to even reinforce mine with stitching because it was starting to pull away. So if you're using a very fine fabric like I was using Organza, it's going to start pulling. So I had to reinforce it so that over time the pulling process wouldn't pull the hole open, and eventually these would become useless. They will fall out. So once that's done, I take my plastic and I put it right behind that piece. And then lastly, with the groove facing up, and that's very important, with the groove facing up. So here we have the groove, and then this side is a little bit more flat. So with the groove facing up, I place this behind it. So now we're going to move on to a firmer surface so that I can hammer down the eyelet. So I have my tools here, and what I do is I'm going to place, this is a harder surface to allow for hammering, and I'm just going to make sure I place that right on top. Now placement is very important because if it is not properly placed, you're going to warp the inside of it, and if you're running lace or ribbon or anything through, that warp is going to create a snag, and that's going to rip and shred anything that you put through there. So you'll constantly be replacing ribbon because it's continuously getting snagged, or you can create a sharp edge that when you put it and you lay it flat on your back, it cuts up your back. So it's very important that when you're placing this on top, you make sure that it's nice and even, so that when you place this tool here, it fits snugly. I always gently tap a few times, check to make sure that the eyelet hasn't moved and it's not creating weird warps, and then I will flip it over to the other side and use this point to make sure that the other side is folding in so that everything is nice and flat, just like this is here. So a few taps. I remove this and then I lift. Perfect. That's exactly what you want. There's no warping in between. The metal isn't warping anywhere, and I have a perfectly placed grommet. Eyelet. So if you're looking at this now and you're wondering why she looks a little different from the initial tutorial, that was just me just walking you through the process, but this is the finished result of that very process. And this is the back view. We're going to take this entire dress with the corset portion to my dress form, and we're going to lace it up so we can see how the completed piece looks so far. Okay, so this is what she looks like laced up. I'm still working on the dress itself, but the corset portion of the dress is done, and I just have to go now and add a zipper and finish hand sewing the floral attachments as well as the lace. But I wanted you guys to see what the finished corset looks like all tied up. This dress form is actually bigger than the customer, so that might be why it's a little bit off, but this is essentially what the corset looks once you've completed it. We've got our lacing detail, and beautiful. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Videos are uploaded weekly covering dressmaking, fashion, lectures, and more.